My name is Rachel, and I'm 43 years old, a divorced mother of two wonderful but complicated children. For years, I thought I was doing everything right, balancing the needs of both my son Ethan and daughter Zoe. But one decision shattered our family completely. When Zoe began dating Jason, the boy who had tormented Ethan throughout high school, I made a devastating choice. I chose peace over protection, and now my son won't speak to me. The pain of losing him feels unbearable. Before I share my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever experienced family rifts that seemed impossible to heal, please hit like and subscribe. We're all trying to find our way back to those we love. When Thomas and I divorced 8 years ago, I worried constantly about how it would affect our children. Ethan was 14, then Zoe just 11. Despite the marriage ending, I was determined to create a stable, loving home where both my children could thrive. Back then, we were still a unit, still a family despite the missing piece. Ethan was always my sensitive child. Even as a little boy, he felt things deeply. While other kids would bounce back from disappointments, Ethan would carry them, turning them over in his mind like smooth stones. He was brilliantly intelligent, particularly with computers and mathematics. By 7th grade, he was already coding his own simple games and helping me troubleshoot my phone when it glitched. His teachers called him gifted but reserved. He had a small circle of equally thoughtful friends who would spend weekends at our house engaged in elaborate board games or deep discussions about science fiction. Zoe was Ethan's opposite in many ways. Where he was thoughtful and cautious, she was bold and spontaneous. Her energy filled rooms before she even entered them. She made friends everywhere she went: the grocery store clerk, the mail carrier, the new kid at school. Her athletic abilities earned her spots on both the soccer and volleyball teams, and weekends often meant driving her to tournaments while Ethan stayed home with his projects. Despite their differences, my children shared a special bond during those early years. Ethan would help Zoe with her math homework, and she would defend him fiercely if anyone at school said something unkind. They had inside jokes I never understood, whispered conversations that would dissolve into giggles when I entered the room. Our life together had a comfortable rhythm. Sunday nights were sacred family movie nights. We'd take turns choosing films sprawled across our worn sectional sofa with homemade popcorn. Thanksgiving meant my children helping me prepare family recipes passed down from my grandmother. Christmas Eve was always spent driving around looking at neighborhood lights while drinking hot chocolate. These traditions anchored us through the turbulent years after the divorce. My career as a nurse at Memorial Hospital meant long shifts and sometimes unpredictable hours. I'd often come home exhausted, my feet aching, and my mind still processing the day's emergencies. But no matter how tired I was, I tried to be present for my children. I'd listen to Zoe's animated recounting of soccer practice, or sit with Ethan as he explained his latest coding project even when I understood very little of what he was saying. Balancing their different needs wasn't always easy. Zoe required constant activity and social engagement. Ethan needed quiet and space. I tried to create a home where both could flourish, designating the basement as Ethan's lab, while allowing Zoe to have friends over in the living room. Weekends often involved a careful orchestration of activities, attending Zoe's games while making sure Ethan had transportation to his coding club meetups. The first hints of sibling tension began around Ethan's sophomore year of high school. As they grew into teenagers, their natural differences became more pronounced. Zoe began gravitating toward the popular crowd, athletes and student council members who ruled the school's social hierarchy. Ethan remained on the periphery, comfortable with his small group of friends, but increasingly aware of the social stratification that defines high school. They started arguing more. Small disagreements escalated into door-slamming fights. Zoe complained that Ethan was weird and embarrassing, while Ethan accused her of being shallow and fake. I tried to mediate to help them see value in their differences, but adolescence is rarely a time of mutual appreciation between siblings. Throughout these challenging years, my parenting philosophy remained consistent. I wanted my children to make their own choices and develop independence. When Ethan decided to join the robotics team instead of a sport, I supported him. When Zoe wanted to try out for cheerleading, despite her primary commitment to soccer, I encouraged her. I believed that my job was to guide rather than dictate, to advise rather than control. Looking back, I still believe this approach was right in many ways. Children need to develop their own identities, separate from their parents' expectations. But I failed to recognize when independence needed to be balanced with protection, when support needed to be tempered with boundaries. This blindness would eventually cost me my relationship with my son. Despite the normal tensions of adolescence, I truly believed we were doing well as a family. Ethan was excelling academically, setting his sights on prestigious computer science programs. Zoe was thriving socially and athletically, already receiving interest from college scouts by her sophomore year. I was managing my career while maintaining our home. From the outside, we probably looked like a success story. A divorced mom and her two accomplished kids beating the odds. I had no idea that beneath this seemingly stable surface, currents were forming that would eventually pull us apart. I couldn't see that the very community that embraced my daughter was slowly crushing my son. And I certainly never imagined that my attempts to support both my children would eventually force me to make an impossible choice between them. The trouble began during Ethan's sophomore year of high school. It started small, missing items from his backpack, unexplained tears in his notebooks, coming home later than usual because he was taking alternative routes. At first, I attributed these changes to normal teenage moodiness. Ethan had always been private, and I respected his space perhaps too much. It wasn't until I found him sitting in the dark in his room one evening, still in his clothes from school at 10 p.m., that I realized something was seriously wrong. When I turned on the light, I saw his red-rimmed eyes and the defeated slump of his shoulders. That night, after gentle prodding, the story spilled out. "His name is Jason Marshall," Ethan said, his voice flat. "He's in my English and physics classes." Jason Marshall. The name would eventually become a scar across our family history, but that night, it was just the name of a boy I didn't know. A junior star wide receiver on the football team, student council treasurer, and according to Ethan, everything I'm not. The bullying had started with small comments. "Einstein needs a haircut." "Did you program yourself to dress that way?" Subtle enough to fly under teachers' radar, but persistent enough to sting. Over time, it escalated. Jason would knock Ethan's books from his hands in crowded hallways, cough "freak" when passing him in the cafeteria, and once dumped an entire bottle of water into Ethan's open backpack, ruining his laptop. But the worst incidents were social. Jason had a gift for public humiliation. During a class presentation on career aspirations, he led a slow clap after Ethan's earnest speech about wanting to develop accessibility software for disabled users. "So brave," he'd said, his voice dripping with mockery, "to admit you have no life." The class laughed, the teacher frowned, but said nothing, and Ethan stood frozen at the front of the room, his careful note cards trembling in his hands. Another time, Jason created a fake social media profile with Ethan's photo and name, filling it with embarrassing fictional stories and altered images. The profile gained hundreds of followers before the school administration finally had it removed, but by then, the damage was done. For weeks, Ethan endured whispers and snickers in the hallways, references to posts he'd never made. The worst came at the winter formal. Ethan had been hesitant to attend, but his small group of friends convinced him. They had a table together, were planning to just enjoy the music and food without the pressure of dates. But Jason orchestrated a cruel prank. He convinced a girl from another school to approach Ethan, express interest, and ask him to dance. When Ethan nervously accepted and walked onto the dance floor with her, she suddenly announced loudly that she couldn't go through with the dare and walked away laughing, leaving him standing alone while Jason and his friends recorded the whole thing on their phones. Ethan's mental health began a steep decline. His grades slipped from straight A's to B's and C's. He developed stomach problems that frequently kept him home from school. He stopped eating meals with us, taking his food to his room instead. The bright, curious boy who had once talked animatedly about quantum computing over dinner now spoke in monosyllables when he spoke at all. When I realized how serious the situation had become, I immediately contacted the school. The administration's response was infuriatingly inadequate. The principal, a former football coach himself, listened to my concerns with a professionally sympathetic expression before assuring me they had zero tolerance for bullying, but needed concrete evidence to take action. "Boys this age can be rough with each other," he explained, leaning back in his leather chair. "It builds character. And often, what parents perceive as bullying is just typical teenage conflict." I provided evidence, screenshots of the fake profile witness accounts from Ethan's friends, even a cell phone recording of Jason and his friends mocking Ethan in the cafeteria. The response was always the same. Warnings were issued, brief suspensions from extracurricular activities were sometimes imposed, but nothing substantial changed. Jason was too valuable to the school. His football talent brought attention and funding. His academic achievements looked good in school statistics, and his family made generous donations to school programs. The administration was reluctant to take meaningful action against him, especially based on complaints from a quiet, unremarkable student like Ethan. I considered changing schools, but the closest alternative was a 40-minute drive away. And with my nursing schedule, the logistics seemed impossible. Instead, I found Ethan a therapist, Dr. Winters, who specialized in adolescent trauma. I scheduled appointments for him 3 times a month, driving him directly from school to avoid having to explain to anyone where he was going. Dr. Winters helped, but she couldn't undo the daily damage. Ethan developed anxiety so severe that he would sometimes have panic attacks on Sunday nights, knowing he had to face school the next day. He lost weight, developed insomnia, and the light in his eyes dimmed to a cautious wariness that broke my heart. Through it all, I tried to be his advocate and safe haven. I taught him breathing techniques for anxiety, helped him practice responses to taunting, and reminded him constantly that high school was temporary, that his intelligence and kindness would carry him to better places. Some days, it seemed to help. Other days, I would find him staring blankly at his computer screen, too exhausted by the social battlefield of high school to even engage with the coding projects that had once brought him joy. Zoe, 2 years younger and still in middle school during the worst of it, knew something was wrong with her brother, but didn't understand the full extent. I tried to explain without burdening her with too much detail, and she responded with the fierce loyalty of a younger sister. "I'll beat him up when I get to high school," she declared once her small fists clenched. I hugged her, appreciating her protective instinct while gently explaining that violence wasn't the answer. When Ethan finally graduated high school, I thought the nightmare was over. He had been accepted to a prestigious computer science program at a university 3 hours away. Jason Marshall had graduated a year earlier and was attending a state college on a football scholarship. I believed we had weathered the storm, that Ethan could finally heal and move forward. College transformed my son. Away from his hometown and the memories that haunted every corner of his high school, Ethan found his community. He joined the university's computer science club and a gaming group. He secured an internship at a local tech startup after just his first semester. His roommate became a close friend rather than just an assigned living companion. When he came home for breaks, I saw glimpses of the bright, curious boy I remembered. He talked animatedly about his projects, his professors, his new friends. The haunted look in his eyes had faded. I thought the chapter of Jason Marshall was firmly closed in our family history. I was wrong. The worst was yet to come, and this time I wouldn't just be a helpless bystander to my son's pain. I would be its cause. Last summer marked a turning point in our family's story. Zoe had just completed her freshman year at Westlake University, only an hour from home. She had chosen to stay relatively close, balancing her desire for independence with her connection to hometown friends and her soccer scholarship. I was thrilled to have her home for the summer, the house having felt too quiet with both children away. The first few weeks were wonderful. Zoe filled our home with her energy again, coming and going between shifts at her summer job as a youth soccer coach, catching up with high school friends, and lounging by the community pool. Ethan was due to arrive in mid-June after completing a summer coding workshop at his university. I looked forward to having both my children under one roof again, even temporarily. Then came the conversation that would change everything. Zoe and I were preparing dinner together, something we had always enjoyed doing. She was chopping vegetables while I marinated chicken, telling me about her freshman year, the classes she loved, the demanding practice schedule, the new friends she'd made. Then she casually mentioned she had been dating someone new for the past 2 months. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, genuinely pleased. Zoe had had a few boyfriends in high school, but nothing serious. "Is he from Westlake?" "Actually," she said, her knife pausing above the cutting board, "you know him. He's from here." Something in her tone made me look up. She was biting her lip, a childhood habit that always surfaced when she was nervous. "It's Jason," she said. "Jason Marshall." The name hit me like a physical blow. The chicken breast I was seasoning slipped from my fingers onto the countertop. "Jason Marshall, Ethan's Jason Marshall." She nodded, putting down her knife. "I know it sounds crazy, but we reconnected at Christmas break. He was home from state, and we ran into each other at the grind. We got talking, and he's changed, Mom. He's not the same person he was in high school." I remember staring at her, trying to process what she was saying. My daughter was dating the boy who had made her brother's life a living hell, the boy whose actions had led to years of therapy, anxiety, and pain. The boy whose name still couldn't be mentioned in our home without Ethan tensing visibly. "Zoe, you can't be serious," I finally managed. "Do you have any idea what he did to your brother?" She sighed, clearly having anticipated this reaction. "Yes, Mom, I know. And believe me, I thought about that. I didn't plan for this to happen, but people change. Jason has grown up a lot since then. He even admits that he was terrible in high school." "Does Ethan know about this?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Not yet," she admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first. Figure out how to tell him." That night, I barely slept. My mind kept cycling through impossible scenarios. Should I forbid the relationship? Zoe was 19, technically an adult, and prohibition would likely only strengthen her resolve. Should I insist she end things before Ethan came home? That seemed manipulative and controlling. Should I try to separate the past from the present? Give Jason a chance to prove he had changed? But how could I ever look at him without seeing the pain he'd caused my son? The situation exploded before I could formulate a plan. Ethan came home earlier than expected, surprising us by arriving the very next evening. He walked into a house where Zoe was setting the table for dinner, and Jason was helping me carry dishes from the kitchen. The look on Ethan's face as he stood in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, will haunt me forever. First confusion, then recognition, then a pain so raw it seemed to physically transform him. He looked suddenly younger, smaller, like the wounded 16-year-old I had tried so hard to protect. "What is he doing here?" Ethan asked, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Zoe stepped forward. "Ethan, I can explain." What followed was the most heated argument our family had ever experienced. Ethan, usually so controlled, shouted until his voice grew hoarse. He called Zoe a traitor, asked how she could possibly bring that monster into their home. Zoe defended her choices, insisted people could change, that Jason deserved a second chance. Jason stood awkwardly by the door, saying little beyond a mumbled apology that sounded hollow even to my ears. I tried to mediate to calm both my children, but I was unprepared for the situation. My attempts at peacekeeping came across as dismissive of Ethan's pain. When I suggested we all sit down and talk it through, Ethan looked at me with disbelief. Talk it through, like it's some minor disagreement about what movie to watch. He tormented me for years, Mom. Years. And now you're serving him dinner in our home. He left that night, going to stay with his friend Mike's family, the same friends who had supported him through the worst of the bullying. I called repeatedly, but he wouldn't answer. When he finally texted back, it was just to let me know he was safe and to ask for space. Over the next few weeks, the division in my family deepened. Zoe continued seeing Jason, though she agreed not to bring him to the house while Ethan was in town. Jason sent Ethan a text message that read, "Hey man, I know I was a jerk in high school. People change. Hope we can move past it." The half-hearted apology only further infuriated Ethan, who saw it as trivializing years of targeted harassment. I found myself increasingly caught in an impossible position. When I expressed concern to Zoe about her relationship, she accused me of not trusting her judgment. When I tried to reach out to Ethan, suggesting that perhaps people could change and deserve second chances, he felt I was invalidating his experience. In my misguided attempt to support both my children, I began pressuring Ethan to forgive and move forward for the family's sake. I said things I now deeply regret, that he was stuck in the past, that holding grudges only hurts you, that sometimes we need to let go for our own health. What I didn't understand then, what I failed to see in my desperate attempt to keep peace, was that I wasn't just asking Ethan to tolerate his sister's poor choice in boyfriends. I was asking him to sit across the dinner table from his abuser and pretend everything was fine. I was asking him to sacrifice his mental health and sense of safety for the comfort of others, including the very person who had caused him so much pain. As the summer progressed, the rift widened. Ethan began spending more time with Mike's family and less time at home. Zoe became increasingly defensive of Jason and distant from her brother. She created a narrative where Jason was the reformed bully seeking redemption and Ethan was the unforgiving obstacle to family harmony. I tried to facilitate reconciliation in all the wrong ways. I arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, where Ethan and Jason could talk one-on-one. Ethan didn't show up. I suggested family therapy, but Zoe refused, saying she wasn't the one with the problem. I even tried enlisting Ethan's therapist, Dr. Winters, but she gently reminded me that her obligation was to Ethan's well-being, not family reunification at any cost. By the end of summer, when both my children were preparing to return to their universities, the situation remained unresolved. Ethan had barely spoken to Zoe and had limited his communication with me to brief functional exchanges. Zoe and Jason were still dating, their relationship seemingly strengthened by the opposition they faced. The final blow came at Christmas. In what I now recognize as a catastrophic error in judgment, I invited Jason to our family Christmas dinner without telling Ethan in advance. I convinced myself it was a step toward healing, that the holiday spirit might soften Ethan's stance. In reality, I was prioritizing the appearance of family unity over my son's genuine well-being. It was a decision that would cost me dearly. Christmas had always been sacred in our family. Even after the divorce, we maintained our traditions, decorating the tree together on December 1st, baking my grandmother's gingerbread recipe, watching It's a Wonderful Life on Christmas Eve. This year, I was determined to preserve some semblance of normalcy despite the tension. Ethan arrived home on December 23rd, earlier than expected. I had planned to tell him about Jason's invitation that evening to prepare him, but he walked in while I was setting the dining room table for Christmas Eve dinner. He noticed immediately that I had set 6 places instead of our usual 4, which would have included my sister Amanda, who always joined us. "Who else is coming?" he asked, his backpack still slung over his shoulder. Before I could answer, Zoe walked in from the kitchen. "Jason and his mom," she said, chin lifted slightly in anticipation of his reaction. The color drained from Ethan's face. He looked from Zoe to me, waiting for me to contradict her, when I didn't. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You knew about this?" he asked me. "You invited them?" "Ethan, it's Christmas," I said. my voice pleading. I thought maybe we could try to move forward as a family. Jason has been nothing but respectful since summer, and his mother recently divorced too, so they were going to be alone for the holiday. Respectful? Ethan's voice rose. He sent me a 2-line text, non-apology for years of torment, and you call that respectful, and now you're ambushing me again. It's not an ambush, Zoe interjected. It's dinner. You're being dramatic. I'm being dramatic? Ethan's laugh was hollow. That's rich coming from the girl who's dating the guy who posted edited photos of me online and told everyone I wet myself during finals. I stepped between them, trying to de-escalate. Let's all calm down. Ethan, I understand this is a shock, but it's one dinner. You don't have to be best friends, just civil. Civil, he repeated the word flat. You want me to sit across from someone who made me contemplate dropping out of high school, who had me so anxious I threw up before physics class for an entire semester, and be civil? People change, Zoe insisted. You haven't even given him a chance to show you he's different now. I don't owe him anything, Ethan said, his voice suddenly very quiet. And I thought my family at least understood that. The argument might have continued, but the doorbell rang. Jason and his mother had arrived early. The next hour was excruciating. Jason entered cautiously, offering a stiff "Merry Christmas" to Ethan, who stood frozen in the living room. Jason's mother, Linda, seemed oblivious to the tension, chattering about holiday traffic and complimenting our decorations. I served appetizers, making strained conversation, while Ethan sat silently on the edge of the sofa, as far from Jason as possible. Zoe tried too hard, laughing too loudly at Jason's comments, touching his arm constantly as if to reassure him. Everything fell apart during dinner. We had just served the main course when Jason, perhaps attempting to break the ice, said, "This reminds me of that food fight in the cafeteria senior year. Remember that, Ethan, man? Those were crazy times." Ethan put down his fork with deliberate care. I remember you and your friends started it by dumping spaghetti on Warren Thatcher's head because he was in the chess club. I remember the principal blamed the troublemakers from the math team. I remember you walked away without a single consequence while 5 innocent kids got 2 weeks of detention. So yeah, crazy times. Jason's facade of politeness slipped. Jesus, are you still keeping score from high school? It was just kid stuff. Maybe if you hadn't been such an easy target. Jason, Zoe hissed, but the damage was done. Ethan stood up so quickly, his chair toppled backward. An easy target. There it is. That's who you're dating, Zoe. Someone who still thinks bullying is the victim's fault. Linda looked confused. I'm sorry, what's happening here? Jason was a model student. His teachers loved him. Of course they did, Ethan said. He was a star athlete who helped them win games. It didn't matter what he did to kids like me as long as he scored touchdowns. I stood up, trying desperately to salvage the situation. Ethan, please. It's Christmas. Can we just have a nice dinner? He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes was worse than anger. It was betrayal, pure and complete. A nice dinner, he repeated. That's what matters to you. Not what happened to me, not what I went through, not the fact that you've invited my bully into our home and are serving him Christmas dinner. You just want everything to look nice on the surface. That's not fair, I protested. I'm trying to support both my children. No, he cut me off. You're trying to avoid conflict. You're choosing the easiest path, not the right one. And you know what? You've made your choice clear. He turned to Zoe. He hasn't changed. He just got better at hiding who he really is. One day, you'll see it too, and I hope for your sake it doesn't cost you as much as it cost me. Then he looked back at me, his eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't pretend it's okay. I can't keep sacrificing my mental health so everyone else can feel comfortable. I'm done. He walked out of the dining room, and moments later, I heard him gathering his things upstairs. I followed, begging him to stay to talk it through. His response was to pull out his phone and book a hotel room for the night. "I'll come back for the rest of my things tomorrow while everyone's at Aunt Amanda's," he said, zipping his backpack. "I think it's better if I don't stay here anymore. Not while he's welcome in this house." "Ethan, please," I pleaded. "You're my son. I love you." "Then you should have protected me," he said simply, and walked past me down the stairs. The front door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than a slam would have. I stood frozen on the landing, tears streaming down my face, the worst Christmas of my life unfolding around me. Downstairs, the aftermath was chaotic. Linda was gathering her coat, clearly uncomfortable. Jason was defensive, telling Zoe, "See, I tried. It's not my fault he can't let go of high school drama." Zoe was crying, torn between running after her brother and staying with her boyfriend. When I came back down, Zoe turned on me. "Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you make him stay?" "Make him stay?" I repeated, dazed. "Zoe, he's an adult. I can't force him to stay where he doesn't feel safe." "Safe?" Jason scoffed. "It's not like I was going to tackle him over the turkey." That comment, that dismissive tone, finally penetrated the fog of my misguided neutrality. For the first time, I looked at Jason, really looked at him, and saw not the polite young man who had been dating my daughter for months, but glimpses of the cruel teenager who had tormented my son. It was there in the slight curl of his lip, the casual way he dismissed Ethan's feelings, the underlying current of superiority. But the realization came too late. Ethan had already gone, taking with him any chance of an immediate reconciliation. As Jason and Linda awkwardly made their exit and Zoe retreated to her room in tears, I sat alone at our half-eaten Christmas dinner, surrounded by the wreckage of my family. That night, I tried calling Ethan repeatedly. His phone went straight to voicemail. I texted apologies that showed as delivered, but never read. I even drove to the hotel where he said he'd booked a room, but the front desk wouldn't confirm if he was staying there, citing privacy policies. I returned home to find Zoe angry rather than contrite. "You're taking his side now," she demanded when I suggested that perhaps Jason's comment at dinner revealed he hadn't changed as much as she thought. "I'm not taking sides," I said, exhausted. "I'm just saying that your brother's feelings are valid, and maybe we all need to be more sensitive to what he went through." "What about my feelings?" she countered. "Don't I deserve to be happy, to date who I want without my brother's permission?" In that moment, I realized how deeply I had failed both my children. I had tried so hard not to take sides that I had abdicated my responsibility to guide them. I had equated Zoe's right to date whom she chose with Ethan's right to feel safe in his family home. These were not equivalent, and in treating them as such, I had caused irreparable harm. The next day, true to his word, Ethan came by while we were at my sister's house. He took most of his remaining belongings, leaving behind only childhood items too bulky to transport. He left his house key on the kitchen counter with a note that simply read, "I'll always love you, but I can't be around you right now. Please respect my need for space. Ethan." Those words marked the beginning of the longest, most painful period of my life as a mother. My son had cut ties with me, and the worst part was knowing I deserved it. The weeks and months that followed were some of the darkest of my life. January came with its gray skies and bitter winds, a perfect backdrop to the cold emptiness in our home. Ethan returned to his university without saying goodbye. My calls continued to go unanswered, my texts unread, my emails ignored. Through mutual friends, I learned he had moved off campus with his roommate Mike and another friend taking a part-time job at the university's computer lab to support himself. He had always been partially financially dependent on me, but now he was determined to sever even that connection. In February, I drove to his university unannounced, desperate just to see him, to know he was okay. I waited outside the computer science building where I knew he had classes on Tuesday afternoons. When he emerged surrounded by friends, the momentary look of shock on his face quickly hardened into something like resignation. He asked his friends to go ahead without him and walked over to where I stood. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I needed to see you," I replied, fighting back tears. "I've been so worried." "I'm fine," he said. "I'm going to class, doing my work, living my life. You don't need to worry." "Ethan, please, can we talk? Really talk? I know I made terrible mistakes, but you're my son. I love you more than anything." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke me. "I know you love me, Mom. That's what makes it worse. You loved me, and you still couldn't see what you were doing. I need time. A lot of time." "How much time?" I asked, my voice small. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Maybe a long time, maybe forever. I can't be around you without thinking about that Christmas dinner, about all the times you asked me to just get over it for the family's sake. I can't do it anymore." He stepped back, adjusting his backpack. "I have to go to lab now. Please don't come here again. If I want to talk, I'll reach out." I watched him walk away, my brilliant wounded son straight-backed and determined as he disappeared into the crowd of students. I sat in my car and sobbed for an hour before I could drive home. Back in our hometown, things with Zoe were deteriorating as well. What had begun as a rift between siblings was now affecting our relationship too. She resented what she saw as my switching allegiance to Ethan, while I was increasingly concerned about her relationship with Jason. Now that my eyes were opened, I began noticing troubling patterns. Jason would check Zoe's phone when she wasn't looking. He would make subtle comments about her clothes being too revealing, or her spending too much time with her friends. When she was accepted for a prestigious summer soccer training program in another state, he questioned whether it was worth it and suggested she could find something closer to home. When I tried to discuss these concerns with Zoe, she became defensive. "You're just looking for reasons to dislike him now," she accused. "You've decided Ethan was right all along, and nothing Jason does will ever be good enough." Perhaps there was some truth to that. Perhaps I was scrutinizing Jason more closely now, seeing the red flags I had willfully ignored before. But the controlling behaviors were real, not imagined, and they worried me deeply. In March, an unexpected encounter provided a new perspective. I was at the grocery store when I literally bumped carts with Dr. Winters, Ethan's former therapist. We recognized each other immediately, and after an awkward moment, decided to grab coffee at the store's cafe, though bound by confidentiality regarding Ethan's specific therapy doctor. Winters spoke in general terms about the lasting impact of bullying. "Many people underestimate how traumatic sustained bullying can be," she explained. "We're not talking about occasional teasing or one-time incidents. We're talking about systematic targeting over years during crucial developmental stages. The effects can be similar to other forms of trauma." She continued, choosing her words carefully. "When someone is forced to interact with their former bully without proper reconciliation, which requires genuine remorse and changed behavior, not just words, it can re-traumatize them. It's like asking someone who survived a car accident to casually ride with the drunk driver who hit them." Her analogy hit me with the force of physical pain. That was exactly what I had done to Ethan. I had asked him to casually dine with the person who had systematically traumatized him for years, all in the name of family harmony. Dr. Winters must have seen the realization on my face. "Supporting someone who's experienced bullying means believing them," she said gently. "It means validating that what happened to them was wrong, not minimizing it or rushing their healing for someone else's comfort." That conversation was the catalyst for my own journey into therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in family trauma and committed to weekly sessions. Through this work, I began to understand the profound errors in my approach. I had been conflict avoidant my entire life, prioritizing surface peace over addressing underlying issues. I had failed to distinguish between supporting my daughter's independence and enabling a relationship that was harmful to both my children. Most painfully, I recognized that I had betrayed my son in one of the most fundamental ways possible. I had failed to be his safe haven in a world that had already hurt him deeply. April brought a new development. Zoe called me one evening, her voice shaky. "Something happened," she said. "Jason and I had a fight." The fight had started over something trivial. She wanted to attend a friend's birthday party that fell on the same weekend as one of Jason's family events. But it had escalated quickly, with Jason accusing her of never prioritizing him and making veiled references to her being just like her brother. "He said some things about Ethan," she admitted, her voice small. "Ugly things that made me see, maybe Ethan was right. Maybe Jason hasn't changed as much as I thought." Though I was relieved that Zoe was beginning to see Jason's true character, my heart ached for her disappointment. "I'm so sorry, honey," I said. "Do you want to talk about it more? Or do you need some space to process?" "I think I need space," she said. "I'm staying at Mia's tonight. I need to think." Over the next few weeks, Zoe's relationship with Jason deteriorated further. She began noticing more controlling behaviors, more subtle put-downs, more attempts to isolate her from friends. Their fights increased in frequency and intensity. Finally, in early May, she ended the relationship. The breakup was messy. Jason alternated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with cruel comments. He showed up uninvited at our house several times until I finally threatened to call the police. He spread rumors about Zoe among their mutual friends, causing some to take sides against her. Through it all, Zoe displayed a resilience that made me proud, even as I regretted that she had to learn such difficult lessons so young. "I keep thinking about what Ethan said at Christmas," she told me one evening as we sat on the porch swing. "That Jason hadn't changed, he'd just gotten better at hiding who he really was. He was right, Mom, and I should have listened." Her words sparked a new wave of grief for the damage done to my relationship with Ethan. Zoe seemed to read my thoughts. "Have you heard from him?" she asked quietly. "No," I admitted. "I've sent letters, emails. I even had flowers delivered on his birthday last month, but nothing. The last I heard, he's doing well in his classes, preparing for a summer internship in Seattle." Zoe was quiet for a moment. "I want to apologize to him," she finally said, "but I'm afraid he'll never forgive me either." "We have to respect his boundaries," I said, the painful lesson finally learned. "When and if he's ready to hear from us, he'll let us know." That summer, I devoted myself to intense self-reflection and change. I wrote Ethan long, heartfelt letters, taking full responsibility for my actions, expressing my remorse without expectations of forgiveness. I sent them monthly, not knowing if they were read or immediately discarded, but needing to put my regret and love into words. I also reached out to some of Ethan's friends from high school, the ones who had stood by him during the worst of the bullying. Through them, I occasionally received crumbs of information. Ethan had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program. He had won an award for a coding project. He was dating someone new, a fellow computer science student. Each piece of news was bittersweet, joy at his accomplishments mixed with the ache of not sharing them directly. I kept a journal of these milestones, hoping that someday I might be able to tell him how proud I had been all along. In August, a small breakthrough came in the form of an acknowledgement. I had sent Ethan a card for his half-birthday, something I used to do when he was little. This time, instead of silence, I received a brief text. "Thanks for the card." 2 words. Just 2 words, but they were the first direct communication he had initiated in 8 months. I stared at them on my phone screen until they blurred through my tears, careful not to overwhelm him with my response. You're welcome. I love you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a tiny opening in a door I had feared permanently closed. And for that moment, it was enough. The path to healing with my son has been long and is still ongoing. That first text message in August was followed by silence for another 2 months. Then in October, another brief message. Got your letter. Reading them all now. I held my breath waiting for more, but nothing came. Still, it was progress. He was reading my letters, the ones where I had poured out my regret, my understanding of how deeply I had failed him, my commitment to change. I dared to hope that my words were reaching him, even if he wasn't ready to respond. November brought another development. Ethan's birthday was approaching, and I sent a simple card with a gift certificate to his favorite tech store. This time, he called. The conversation was brief and somewhat formal, but hearing his voice after nearly a year brought tears to my eyes. I got your card, he said. Thank you. You're welcome, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I hope you're doing well with your studies. I am, he said. Then after a pause, your letters. They helped. I'm not ready to talk about everything yet, but I wanted you to know I've read them all. That means a lot to me, I said. I meant every word. I know, he said quietly. I need to go now. I have a study group, but thanks for not giving up. The call ended, but those last words, thanks for not giving up, sustained me through the holiday season, another Christmas without my son at home. In January, almost exactly a year after our estrangement began, Ethan agreed to meet me for coffee in a neutral location halfway between our homes. I arrived early, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my cup. When he walked in, the sight of him, taller somehow, more confident in his movements, nearly undid me. We sat across from each other, awkward at first, making small talk about the weather, his classes, my work. Then finally, he looked at me directly and said, I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom. A lot of therapy, too. Me too, I said. Both the thinking and the therapy. He nodded. I know. Your letters showed that. They're part of why I'm here. Slowly, carefully, we began to talk about the real issues. I listened more than I spoke, truly hearing him perhaps for the first time. He explained how my actions had felt like a fundamental betrayal, how I had prioritized peace over protection, how I had invalidated his trauma in my attempts to create a facade of family harmony. The worst part, he said, his voice thick with emotion, was feeling like I wasn't worth defending, like what happened to me didn't matter enough to take a stand. It did matter, I said, tears streaming down my face. You mattered. I failed to show it in the way you needed. I was so focused on not taking sides that I didn't see I was actually taking the wrong side by default. We talked for hours until the coffee shop was nearly empty and the baristas were clearly waiting for us to leave. We didn't resolve everything that day. How could we after such a profound breach of trust? But we made a beginning. We agreed to meet again the following month and to start family therapy if and when he felt ready to include Zoe in our reconciliation process. That was 6 months ago. Since then, we have met regularly, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with our therapist. Each conversation has brought more understanding, more healing. It hasn't always been easy. There have been setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to emerge, when defensiveness crept into my responses. But I have learned finally to put my son's healing above my comfort. I have learned to sit with the discomfort of knowing I caused him pain. I have learned that true love sometimes means acknowledging terrible mistakes without seeking immediate absolution. Ethan has begun rebuilding his relationship with Zoe as well, though more cautiously. Their first meeting was tense with years of hurt between them. But Zoe's genuine remorse for dating Jason and her newfound understanding of the pain that caused Ethan opened the door to communication. They are not yet the close siblings they once were, but they are talking, texting, occasionally, finding their way back to each other, one careful step at a time. As for Jason Marshall, he is no longer a part of our lives. After the breakup, he eventually stopped trying to contact Zoe and moved on to someone new. I sometimes wonder if he will ever truly understand the damage he caused, or if he will continue through life believing his actions were just kid stuff without lasting consequences. The journey of reconciliation with my son has taught me profound lessons about parenting, about protection, about the difference between neutrality and justice. I learned that sometimes love means taking a stand, even when it's uncomfortable. I learned that peace at any price is no peace at all. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to try to make amends, to acknowledge mistakes, to commit to doing better. My relationship with Ethan is forever changed. There will always be a scar where this wound occurred, but it is healing slowly and steadily, built on a new foundation of honesty, respect, and true understanding. To those of you watching who may be experiencing your own family rifts, your own painful estrangements, I want to say this genuine reconciliation begins with accountability. It requires humility and patience. It means prioritizing the healing of the person you've hurt over your own desire for forgiveness. And sometimes it means accepting that the relationship may never be what it once was, while still working to build something new that honors the truth of what happened. I almost lost my son completely because I failed to protect him when he needed me most. I'm grateful every day for his willingness to give me a second chance, one I know I don't deserve, but am committed to earning. The road ahead is still long, but for the first time in years, we are walking it together. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone you love after a serious mistake? How did you navigate that difficult path? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about family healing journeys. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the hardest apology to make is the one most worth giving.